Across the galaxy, there exists a universal truth that every advanced civilization learns. Power is measured by the size of your fleet, the reach of your empire, and the fear you inspire in others. The Zephyrians had ruled for 3 millennia with this understanding. The Karathi Empire had conquered 12 star systems following this doctrine. Even the peaceful Nexari had earned respect through displays of technological superiority. But on a small blue planet in the outer rim of the Milky Way, humanity was about to shatter everything the galaxy thought it knew about true power. What started as a routine first contact mission would become the moment that changed the course of galactic history forever. Because when Zarthek, a veteran observer from the Galactic Council, witnessed what humans were really capable of, he realized that every civilization in the universe had been measuring power completely wrong. The real power wasn't in the weapons they wielded or the ships they commanded. It was something far more dangerous, far more beautiful, and far more human than anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The observation deck of the Galactic Harmony hummed with the quiet efficiency that Zarthek had grown accustomed to over his 2 centuries of service with the Galactic Council. As the ship's primary xenocultural analyst, he had witnessed first contact with 47 different species, each encounter following the same predictable patterns. Today would be number 48. Zarthek's 4 arms moved gracefully over the holographic displays, reviewing the preliminary data on species designation. Human. The 3rd planet from a yellow dwarf star, relatively young civilization, recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Standard procedure would apply. Assess technological capabilities, evaluate threat level, determine integration potential into the greater galactic community. Initial scans complete, Analyst Zarthek announced Captain Veltar from a bridge. The Korthani captain's voice carried the usual tone of professional boredom. After all, they had done this countless times before. Zarthek's primary eyes focused on the blue and green marble floating in the void before them. Earth, as the inhabitants called it, looked remarkably similar to dozens of other life-bearing worlds he had catalogued. Oceans, continents, polar ice caps, a single natural satellite. Nothing particularly remarkable from an astronomical perspective. The preliminary scans had revealed a global population of approximately 8 billion humans spread across 7 major landmasses. Their technology was impressive for such a young species. They had achieved nuclear fission, developed global communication networks, and even managed to establish small colonies on their moon and the 4th planet in their system. Yet compared to the technological marvels of the Galactic Council's member civilizations, humanity appeared to be just another emerging species taking their first tentative steps into the cosmos. "Shall I begin the standard first contact protocols?" asked Lieutenant Exela, the communications officer whose translucent blue skin shimmered with anticipation. She was young, having joined the diplomatic corps only 50 years ago, and still found excitement in these routine encounters. Zarthek nodded his elongated head, his cranial ridges catching the soft light of the observation deck. Begin with passive observation. Monitor their global communications, analyze their social structures, assess their military capabilities. We need a complete picture before direct contact. As the ship's advanced sensors turned their attention to Earth, Zarthek settled into his favorite chair and prepared for what he expected to be another straightforward assignment. The pattern was always the same. New species demonstrated their worth through displays of military might, technological innovation, or economic prowess. Those who could prove their strength earned a place in the galactic community. Those who could not remained isolated on their home worlds until they achieved the necessary benchmarks. The first data streams began flowing across his displays, and Zarthek started his analysis with the same methodical approach he had used for decades. Human military capabilities appeared modest. They possessed nuclear weapons, but their delivery systems were primitive compared to galactic standards. Their space fleet consisted of a handful of research vessels and cargo haulers, hardly the intimidating armada that typically announced a species ready for galactic citizenship. Their technology showed promise, but lacked the revolutionary breakthroughs that would mark them as exceptional. They had developed artificial intelligence, but it was rudimentary compared to the synthetic consciousnesses that served as integral members of several council species. Their energy production relied heavily on fossil fuels and nuclear fission, with only limited exploration of fusion and renewable sources. Economically, humanity appeared to be in a state of transition. They had moved beyond simple barter systems to complex global markets, but their resource distribution was inefficient and uneven. Many regions of their planet showed signs of poverty and scarcity, while others displayed abundance and waste. It was a common pattern among developing civilizations, the growing pains of a species learning to manage planetary resources. Analyst Zarthek, Lieutenant Excella's voice carried a note of confusion. I'm detecting some unusual patterns in their global communications. Zarthek's secondary eyes shifted to the communications analysis. Define unusual, Lieutenant. Well, sir, most species at this technological level use their communication networks primarily for governance, commerce, and military coordination. But humans seem to be using their networks for... She paused, her skin cycling through several shades of blue as she processed the data. For sharing images of small furry creatures, expressing opinions about food preparation, and engaging in elaborate fictional narratives about their daily lives. A soft chittering sound escaped from Zarthek's throat, the equivalent of a chuckle among his people. Primitive entertainment, typical of pre-contact civilizations. They fill their communication channels with frivolous content because they have not yet learned to appreciate the efficiency of purpose-driven communication. But as he continued to analyze the data streams, Zarthek began to notice other patterns that didn't fit the standard models. Humans were indeed sharing trivial content, but they were also using their network for something he had rarely seen. They were connecting with each other on a massive, global scale for no apparent strategic purpose. A human in what their geography called Japan would share an image of a meal they had prepared, and within minutes, humans from across their planet would respond with encouragement, suggestions, or simply expressions of appreciation. A young human in what they called Brazil would post a video of themselves playing a musical instrument, and other humans from dozens of different nations would respond with compliments and requests for more. Most intriguing of all, Zarthek observed humans sharing their personal struggles and victories with complete strangers, offering support and celebration to individuals they would never meet in person. When a human in what they called Canada posted about feeling sad due to the loss of a pet, humans from around the world responded with sympathy, shared experiences, and offers of comfort. Lieutenant, expand the communication analysis. I want a deeper look at these interaction patterns. As the data flowed in, Zarthek found himself leaning forward in his chair, his scientific curiosity aroused for the first time in decades. The human communication network was not just a tool for information exchange. It was a vast web of emotional and social connection that spanned their entire planet. But it was when he began analyzing their response to crisis situations that Zarthek first glimpsed something that would fundamentally challenge his understanding of power. The ship's sensors had detected a natural disaster occurring in real time on the human homeworld. A massive earthquake had struck a populated region, causing widespread destruction and trapping thousands of humans beneath collapsed structures. Zarthek expected to observe the standard response. Government agencies would coordinate rescue efforts, military units would be deployed to maintain order, and the affected population would wait for organized relief efforts to reach them. Instead, he watched in amazement as something entirely different unfolded. Within minutes of the earthquake, humans who were nowhere near the disaster zone began mobilizing. A human software developer in what they called Sweden immediately began coding a translation application to help international rescue workers communicate with local survivors. A human baker in what they called Morocco started organizing a fundraising effort to provide food and supplies. A human teacher in what they called Mexico began coordinating with local schools to provide temporary housing for displaced families. But It was not just organized relief efforts that caught Zarthek's attention. Individual humans, with no official authority or organized mandate, simply began helping. A human construction worker who had been planning to attend a recreational event instead drove 800 of their distance units to join the rescue efforts. A human doctor who had been on vacation canceled their plans and established a medical station to treat the injured. A human who owned what they called a restaurant began preparing thousands of meals for rescue workers and survivors, purchasing the supplies with their own resources. Captain Veltar, Zarthek called to the bridge, his voice carrying an unusual urgency. "Are you monitoring the human response to the seismic event?" Affirmative, analyst. Standard disaster response protocols appear to be in effect. Government agencies are coordinating relief efforts. Military units are providing logistical support. Nothing unusual from a planetary management perspective. But Zarthek was seeing something that the captain's tactical analysis had missed. This wasn't just a standard disaster response. This was something unprecedented in his experience with 47 other species. Humans were demonstrating a level of spontaneous cooperation and mutual aid that defied every model of civilized behavior he had studied. In galactic civilization, disaster response followed clear hierarchical protocols. The ruling class issued orders, the military implemented those orders, and the population complied. Resources were allocated according to strategic priorities, with the most valuable individuals receiving assistance first. It was efficient, logical, and predictable. But humans were operating according to entirely different principles. A human rescue worker spent hours searching for a single elderly human who had no apparent strategic value. A human pilot used their personal flying vehicle to deliver medical supplies to a remote area where only a handful of humans were trapped. A human child gave their favorite toy to another human child who had lost everything in the earthquake. Most remarkably, humans from around their planet who had no connection to the disaster zone continued to send resources and support long after the immediate crisis had passed. They organized efforts to rebuild homes, funded educational programs for affected children, and maintained contact with survivors to provide ongoing emotional support. Lieutenant ZYXLA, I need detailed behavioral analysis on the humans involved in this disaster response. Focus on decision-making patterns and resource allocation strategies. As the analysis progressed, Zarthek began to understand that what he was observing was not just a response to a single crisis, but a fundamental aspect of human nature. Further research revealed similar patterns throughout their history. Humans consistently demonstrated willingness to sacrifice their own resources, safety, and comfort to help other humans, even complete strangers. During what they called the Second World War, a human woman named Irina Sendler had risked her life repeatedly to smuggle children out of dangerous areas, saving over 2,000 young humans with no regard for her own safety. A human man named Oskar Schindler had used his entire personal fortune to protect humans who were being persecuted, eventually saving over 1,000 lives. These were not isolated incidents, but examples of a pattern that appeared throughout human history. Zarthek's analysis revealed thousands of similar stories. Humans who had run into burning buildings to save strangers, humans who had donated organs to people they had never met, humans who had dedicated their lives to treating diseases in remote areas where they received no recognition or reward. It was a pattern of behavior that seemed to contradict every logical model of self-preservation and resource optimization. The analyst's confusion deepened when he examined human military conflicts. While most species fought wars for territory, resources, or strategic advantage, human conflicts often involved complex motivations that defied simple analysis. Humans had fought wars to free other humans from oppression, even when those other humans lived in different nations and posed no threat to their own safety. They had formed alliances to protect weaker nations, often at tremendous cost to themselves. During what they called World War II, humans from one nation had crossed an entire ocean to help humans from other nations fight against oppressors, despite having no direct strategic interest in the outcome. Human soldiers had repeatedly chosen to sacrifice themselves to save their comrades, often in situations where retreat would have been the tactically sound choice. "Captain," Zarthek called to the bridge again, "I recommend we extend our observation period. This species requires further analysis before we proceed with standard first contact protocols. Is there a potential threat?" "Analyst?" Zarthek paused, considering the question carefully. In traditional terms, humans posed no threat to galactic civilization. Their technology was primitive, their military capabilities limited, their economic power insignificant. By every standard metric used to evaluate emerging species, humans were unremarkable. But something about their behavior patterns was deeply unsettling to his understanding of how civilized beings operated. The spontaneous cooperation, the willingness to sacrifice for strangers, the complex emotional connections that spanned their entire planet. None of it fit the established models of rational behavior. "No immediate threat, Captain, but I believe we may need to revise our assessment criteria for this species." As the galactic harmony continued its silent observation, Zarthek found himself questioning assumptions he had held for 2 centuries of service. Every advanced civilization in the galaxy had achieved their status through the application of logical principles: efficient resource management, strategic military deployment, rational decision-making based on cost-benefit analysis. Humans seemed to operate according to entirely different principles, yet they had somehow managed to develop faster-than-light travel, establish space colonies, and create a global civilization. They had achieved technological advancement not despite their apparent irrationality, but perhaps because of it. The earthquake response continued for weeks, and Zarthek documented every aspect of the human behavior. He watched as humans from around the world maintained their support for the disaster zone long after media attention had moved to other stories. He observed humans developing new technologies specifically to help with disaster relief, sharing those technologies freely with anyone who could use them. He saw humans forming lasting relationships with survivors, creating support networks that extended far beyond the original crisis. Most remarkable of all, he watched as the humans began implementing changes to their global systems based on what they had learned from the disaster response. They developed new early warning systems and shared them with all nations, regardless of political relationships. They created international protocols for disaster relief that prioritized saving lives over national sovereignty. They established educational programs to help young humans learn emergency response skills. The earthquake had become more than just a natural disaster. It had become a catalyst for humans to improve their entire civilization's capacity for mutual aid and cooperation. As Zarthek compiled his preliminary report, he realized that he was documenting something that had never been seen before in the galaxy. A species that appeared to grow stronger through acts of selflessness, that developed technology not just for conquest or profit, but for the purpose of helping others, that measured success not just in terms of individual achievement, but in terms of collective well-being. It was a form of power that defied every model in the Galactic Council's databases. And Zarthek was beginning to suspect that it might be the most dangerous power in the universe. 3 weeks into the observation mission, Zarthek had filled 14 separate databases with behavioral analysis, social pattern documentation, and cultural assessment files. The earthquake response had been just the beginning. As he delved deeper into human society, he discovered layers of complexity that challenged every framework he had used to understand civilization. The morning shift brought new revelations. Lieutenant Zayaxela approached his station with an expression that his translator interpreted as confusion mixed with wonder. "Analyst Zarthek, I've been monitoring human educational institutions as you requested, and I found something extraordinary." Zarthek's primary eyes focused on the data stream she had prepared. Human education was another area where their behavior defied galactic norms. Most civilizations structured education around hierarchy and specialization. The most intellectually capable individuals received advanced training, while others were directed toward supportive roles. It was efficient, logical, and had served galactic civilization well for millennia. But humans had developed something different. They had created institutions dedicated to educating every individual, regardless of their apparent potential or social status. More remarkably, they had humans who chose to dedicate their lives to teaching others, often accepting lower compensation and social status than they could achieve in other professions. Show me the specific case study, Lieutenant. The holographic display shifted to show a detailed analysis of a single human educational facility. The school was located in what humans called Ghana, in a region with limited resources and technological infrastructure. Despite these constraints, Zarthek observed something that made his cranial ridges flutter with surprise. A human teacher named Kwame had spent 15 years working at this school, teaching hundreds of young humans mathematics, science, and literature. But that was not what caught the analyst's attention. Kwame had also spent his own resources to provide meals for students whose families could not afford food. He had purchased educational supplies when the school's budget was insufficient. He had stayed after required hours to provide additional instruction to students who struggled with the standard curriculum. Most remarkably, when Kwame's own child had been accepted to a prestigious educational institution in what humans called the United States, he had chosen to remain in Ghana to continue teaching. He had sacrificed his family's opportunity for advancement to continue serving students who had no connection to him beyond the simple fact that they needed education. Lieutenant, expand the analysis. I want to know if this Kwame individual is exceptional among human educators. The expanded data revealed that Kwame's behavior was not exceptional. It was representative. Across the human planet, Zarthek found thousands of similar examples. Human teachers in remote regions who traveled vast distances to reach isolated communities. Human educators who spent their own money to provide supplies for their students. Human professors who chose to work at institutions that served disadvantaged populations instead of pursuing prestigious positions at elite facilities. But it was not just individual sacrifice that impressed the analyst. Humans had developed entire movements dedicated to improving education for all members of their species. A human named Malala had risked her life to advocate for educational opportunities for female humans in regions where such education was forbidden. Humans in wealthy nations regularly sent resources and volunteers to support education in poorer regions. Human inventors and scientists frequently shared their knowledge freely, without requiring payment or recognition. Captain Veltar, Zarthek called to the bridge. I need to speak with you about our assessment timeline. The Korthani captain materialized on the observation deck a few minutes later, his scaled features showing the mild irritation typical of his species when interrupted from routine operations. Analyst Zarthek, our schedule requires completion of the assessment within 4 standard weeks. The Council has 17 other potential contact situations awaiting our attention. Captain, I believe this species requires a fundamentally different approach to assessment. Their behavioral patterns are unlike anything in our existing databases. Captain Veltar's membranes fluttered dismissively. Analyst, in my 40 years of service, I have heard similar claims about dozens of species. Each contact team believes they have discovered something unique. In the end, every species follows the same basic patterns of civilized development. But Zarthek was no longer certain that was true. As he continued his analysis of human society, he discovered pattern after pattern that defied the standard models. Humans had developed what they called volunteer organizations, groups of individuals who donated their time and resources to help others without any expectation of reward. Some humans spent their weekends feeding individuals who could not afford food. Others dedicated their vacation time to building homes for humans who had been displaced by natural disasters. Still others used their professional skills to provide free services to humans who could not afford to pay for them. The scale of this voluntary cooperation was staggering. Zarthek's analysis revealed that hundreds of millions of humans regularly participated in these activities. They had created global networks of mutual aid that operated parallel to their official governmental systems. A human organization called Doctors Without Borders sent medical professionals into dangerous regions to provide health care without regard for political boundaries or payment. Human engineers volunteered to design water purification systems for communities that lacked clean drinking water. Human teachers traveled to refugee camps to provide education for displaced children. What made this behavior particularly puzzling was that it seemed to contradict the basic principles of resource conservation and self-preservation that governed all known civilizations. Yet somehow, this apparent inefficiency had contributed to humanity's rapid technological and social development. As Zarthek investigated further, he began to understand that human cooperation was not just about immediate aid, it was about something far more sophisticated. Humans had developed the ability to pool their individual capabilities to accomplish tasks that would be impossible for any single individual or even small group. The space program that had enabled humans to achieve faster-than-light travel was a perfect example. No single human nation possessed all the resources and knowledge necessary to develop such technology. Instead, humans from dozens of different nations had worked together, sharing information, resources, and expertise. Scientists from one nation would build on research conducted in another nation. Engineers from different continents would collaborate on design challenges. Humans who spoke different languages and came from vastly different cultural backgrounds found ways to work together toward common goals. Most remarkably, much of this collaboration occurred voluntarily. Humans shared their scientific discoveries through publications that anyone could access. They developed international standards and protocols that facilitated cooperation between different nations. They created educational exchange programs that allowed young humans to learn in different cultures and bring that knowledge back to their own communities. Lieutenant Zwyxella, I want you to analyze human conflict resolution patterns. Focus on how they handle disputes between different groups. The analysis revealed yet another layer of human complexity. While most galactic civilizations resolve conflicts through displays of strength, military power, economic pressure, or technological superiority, humans had developed alternative approaches. Zarthek observed a particularly interesting case study in what humans called South Africa. After decades of conflict based on racial divisions, humans in that region had developed what they called a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Instead of the victorious group imposing their will on the defeated group, the standard pattern throughout galactic history, humans had created a process focused on understanding, acknowledgement, and healing. Former enemies sat together and shared their experiences. Victims told their stories, and perpetrators acknowledged the harm they had caused. Rather than seeking revenge or retribution, many humans focused on finding ways to move forward together. It was not a perfect process, and it did not eliminate all conflict, but it represented a fundamentally different approach to post-conflict social reconstruction. Humans had applied similar principles in other conflict zones. In what they called Northern Ireland, former enemies had worked together to build shared institutions. In what they called Rwanda, humans who had committed terrible acts against each other had found ways to live together in the same communities and work toward collective rebuilding. These approaches contradicted every strategic manual in the Galactic Council archives. The standard protocol for post-conflict situations was clear: establish dominance, ensure compliance, and maintain control through demonstration of superior power. Humans seem to be achieving stability and progress through exactly the opposite approach. Captain, Zarthek called to the bridge again. I need to request emergency consultation with the Council's Xenopsychology Department. Analyst, that would require a formal report of unusual circumstances. Are you prepared to justify such a request? Zarthek considered the question carefully. Standard protocol required contact teams to follow established assessment procedures unless they encountered evidence of imminent threat or exceptional opportunity. What he was observing was certainly exceptional, but it was difficult to classify as either threat or opportunity using traditional frameworks. Captain, I believe we may have discovered a form of social organization that could fundamentally alter our understanding of civilizational development. That evening, as the ship's artificial day cycle dimmed the observation deck lighting, Zarthek found himself staring at Earth with new eyes. The planet looked the same: blue oceans, white clouds, green continents, but his understanding of what was happening on its surface had been transformed. Humans were not just another emerging species following the predictable path toward galactic civilization. They were something entirely different. They had developed technology not just as a tool for dominance, but as a means of connection and mutual support. They had created social structures not just for efficient resource management, but for collective growth and shared flourishing. They had evolved beyond simple survival of the fittest to something that could only be described as survival through cooperation. But it was not just their cooperative behavior that impressed the analyst. As he reviewed the data from the past weeks, Zarthek realized that human cooperation was not passive or naive. When faced with genuine threats, humans demonstrated the ability to unite and respond with devastating effectiveness. During their Second World War, humans from around the planet had cooperated to defeat aggressive forces that threatened global stability. They had shared technology, coordinated military strategies, and sacrificed tremendously to protect not just their own populations, but the principle of freedom itself. When the war ended, instead of the victorious nations conquering and enslaving the defeated populations, the standard galactic approach, humans had helped rebuild the defeated nations and integrate them into the global community. More recently, when faced with global challenges like disease pandemics or environmental threats, humans had demonstrated remarkable ability to coordinate responses across national boundaries and cultural differences. During a recent pandemic, human scientists from around the world had shared data and research in real time, developing treatments and vaccines in a fraction of the time that would have been required by isolated efforts. This was not weakness disguised as strength. This was an entirely different form of strength that the galaxy had never seen before. As Zarthek prepared his preliminary assessment report, he struggled to find adequate terminology to describe what he had observed. The standard categories of civilizational analysis seemed inadequate. Humans could not be classified as a warrior culture, yet they had demonstrated military effectiveness when necessary. They could not be classified as a merchant culture, yet they had developed sophisticated economic systems. They could not be classified as a scholar culture, yet they had achieved remarkable technological advancement. They were something new, a cooperation culture, a civilization that had discovered how to harness the power of voluntary collaboration on a planetary scale. But as Zarthek compiled his observations, he began to realize that his analysis was incomplete. He had documented human behavior during crises, examined their educational and social systems, and analyzed their conflict resolution approaches. But he had not yet observed how humans would respond to the ultimate test: first contact with an alien civilization. How would this species that had learned to cooperate so effectively with each other respond when faced with beings from another world? Would their cooperative instincts extend beyond their own species? Or would first contact reveal that their apparent altruism was limited to their own kind? Captain Veltar, Zarthek called to the bridge one final time. I recommend we proceed to Phase 2 assessment protocols. Analyst, that requires direct contact initiation. Are you certain this species is ready for formal diplomatic engagement? Zarthek looked out at the small blue planet one more time. In all his years of service, he had never recommended direct contact with a species that possessed such limited military and technological capabilities. Every protocol suggested that humans needed at least another century of development before they would be ready for galactic integration. But the protocols have been written based on assumptions about how civilizations develop power and demonstrated readiness for galactic citizenship. Humans had already demonstrated a form of power that the protocols had never anticipated. The question was whether that power would prove to be as effective in interstellar relations as it had been in planetary development. Captain, I believe this species has already demonstrated the most important qualification for galactic citizenship. They have learned how to build something together that is greater than the sum of its parts. The question is whether we are ready for them. The authorization for direct contact came through the quantum communication array 12 hours later, along with a priority message from the Galactic Council that made Zarthek's cranial ridges flatten with concern. Analyst Zarthek, report to the captain's quarters immediately, announced the ship's communication system. Captain Veltar was waiting with a holographic display showing a tactical analysis that looked nothing like the routine first contact scenario Zarthek had expected. Instead of the standard diplomatic protocol flowcharts, the display showed military disposition maps and threat assessment matrices. Analyst, the Council has reviewed your preliminary reports and flagged several concerns. The behavioral patterns you've documented suggest a species with unprecedented capacity for large-scale coordination and resource mobilization. The Strategic Assessment Division has classified this as a potential Type 7 civilization development scenario. Zarthek's primary eyes widened. Type 7 scenarios were reserved for species that showed the potential to disrupt existing galactic power structures. The last Type 7 assessment had been conducted 3 centuries ago, resulting in a quarantine protocol that had isolated an entire star system. Captain, I believe there may be a misunderstanding. Humans have demonstrated cooperative tendencies, but they pose no military threat to galactic civilization. Their technology is primitive. Their space-based capabilities are minimal. Analyst, Captain Veltar interrupted, his scaled features showing the stress patterns typical of Korthani facing difficult decisions. The Strategic Division is not concerned about human military capabilities. They're concerned about human cultural capabilities. A species that can achieve the level of voluntary coordination you've documented could theoretically organize resistance movements that would be impossible to suppress using conventional methods. The implications hit Zarthek like a gravity wave. The Galactic Council maintained peace and stability through a carefully balanced system of technological superiority and economic dependence. Member civilizations were integrated into galactic society in ways that made rebellion both impractical and economically devastating. But humans had demonstrated the ability to sacrifice economic advantage and personal safety for abstract principles. Captain, what are our orders? Standard Type 7 protocol requires us to initiate contact and conduct a definitive assessment of the species' integration potential. If they demonstrate the ability to extend their cooperative behaviors beyond their own species, they may be suitable for gradual integration under careful monitoring. If they prove to be insular or aggressive toward other species, we implement containment protocols. Zarthek felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Containment protocols were euphemistic language for something far more sinister. Species that failed Type 7 assessments were isolated from galactic civilization permanently, their technological development monitored and limited to prevent them from becoming a threat to galactic stability. Captain, I request permission to design the contact scenario personally. My analysis suggests that human responses will be highly dependent on the specific circumstances of first contact. Granted, analyst. But remember that we have limited time. The Council expects a definitive assessment within 10 standard days. As Captain Veltar dismissed him, Zarthek returned to the observation deck with his understanding of the mission fundamentally altered. He was no longer just conducting a routine species assessment. He was determining the fate of an entire civilization. The next 72 hours were the most intense period of analysis in Zarthek's career. He reviewed every piece of data they had collected about human behavior, looking for patterns that would predict how they might respond to contact with alien beings. The historical record was mixed. Humans had demonstrated remarkable capacity for cooperation and mutual aid within their own species, but their treatment of other Earth species was more complicated. They had driven many species to extinction through resource exploitation and environmental destruction, yet they had also developed conservation movements and environmental protection efforts that showed genuine concern for other forms of life. More encouraging was their approach to diversity within their own species. Despite clear physical and cultural differences between different human populations, they had generally moved toward greater inclusion and cooperation over time. Their recent history showed a trend away from isolation and toward global integration. But the real test would be how they responded to beings that were not just different, but completely alien. Zarthek designed the contact scenario with obsessive attention to detail. Instead of the standard approach of contacting government leaders or military authorities, he decided to focus the initial contact on the same kinds of individuals who had impressed him during his observation period. Humans who had demonstrated consistent patterns of helping others. The contact site was a small research station in what humans called Antarctica, where a team of international scientists were conducting climate research. The team included humans from 12 different nations, working together despite having no centralized authority compelling their cooperation. They had chosen to spend months in one of the most isolated and challenging environments on their planet for the sole purpose of gathering knowledge that would benefit all of humanity. Captain, I recommend we begin with a distress signal scenario. Explain your reasoning, analyst. Human behavioral patterns suggest they are most likely to respond positively to contact when they perceive an opportunity to provide assistance. If we present ourselves as beings in need of help, we can observe their natural response patterns without the interference of military or political protocols. Captain Veltar's expression showed skepticism, but he approved the approach. Design your scenario, analyst. But remember that if this fails, we will need to implement more direct contact methods. 3 days later, Zarthek watched from the observation deck as a small shuttle approached the human research station. The shuttle had been configured to appear as though it had suffered mechanical difficulties, its distress signals broadcasting on frequencies the humans used for emergency communications. The human response was immediate and exactly what Zarthek had predicted. Dr. Sarah Chun, the station commander, immediately ordered her team to prepare for a rescue operation. Within minutes, humans were mobilizing equipment and preparing to venture into dangerous weather conditions to provide assistance to beings they had never seen before. Shuttle approaching research station. Dr. Chen's voice came through the communication array. We have rescue teams standing by. Please indicate your condition and requirements for assistance. Lieutenant Zoexela, piloting the shuttle, followed Zarthek's script carefully. We are experiencing life support difficulties. We have injured individuals aboard. We require immediate assistance. The human response was swift and comprehensive. Dr. Chun ordered her medical team to prepare for unknown casualties. She directed her engineers to prepare equipment for potential technical problems. Most remarkably, she made no attempt to verify the identity or intentions of the beings requesting help. Her immediate focus was entirely on providing assistance. As the shuttle landed near the research station, Zarthek monitored the human team's stress indicators and communication patterns. There was clear apprehension and uncertainty. They had no idea what they might encounter when the shuttle opened. But their fear was overshadowed by their determination to help. When the shuttle hatch opened and Lieutenant Zoexela emerged, followed by 2 other members of the contact team, the humans experienced visible shock. But Dr. Chen's first words, transmitted clearly through the communication array, would be words that Zarthek would remember for the rest of his life. Welcome to Earth. How can we help you? No weapons drawn. No demands for identification. No calls to military authorities. Just a simple offer of assistance to beings who clearly came from somewhere beyond Earth. The contact proceeded exactly as Zarthek had hoped. The humans provided medical assistance for the deliberately minor injuries that the contact team had simulated. They offered food and shelter. They shared information about their planet and their species freely without asking for anything in return. But it was Dr. Chin's response to the revelation that the contact team represented an advanced galactic civilization that provided the most crucial data point. "Does this mean there are others out there who might need help?" she asked. "Not what do you want from us, or what can you give us, but who else might need help?" Over the following days, as the contact team revealed more about galactic civilization and the purpose of their mission, the human research team's responses continued to demonstrate the patterns that Zarthek had observed throughout his analysis. When told about the conflicts and challenges facing other species in the galaxy, humans immediately began discussing how Earth's resources and knowledge could be shared to help address those problems. When informed about less technologically advanced species that were struggling with environmental problems, humans offered to share their climate research and environmental protection technologies. Most remarkably, when Dr. Chin learned that some species in the galaxy lived under oppressive governments that limited their freedom and opportunities, she asked whether there was anything humans could do to help those populations achieve greater liberty. "Captain," Zarthek called to the bridge on the 8th day of contact, "I need to provide my final assessment to the Council." "What is your recommendation, analyst?" Zarthek looked out at the small blue planet one more time. In 10 days of intensive observation and direct contact, humans had demonstrated something that no species in galactic history had shown: the ability to extend their cooperative instincts beyond their own species to include beings they had never encountered before. They had not asked what galactic civilization could do for them. They had asked what they could do for galactic civilization. "Captain, I recommend immediate integration protocols with special classification." "Explain." "Humans represent the first species we have encountered that has developed true, universal cooperation instincts. They do not just cooperate with their own kind for mutual benefit. They cooperate with any beings they encounter for the simple reason that cooperation produces better outcomes than conflict." Captain Veltar's expression showed confusion. "Analyst, that contradicts every model of civilizational development. Species that prioritize cooperation over competition should be vulnerable to exploitation by more aggressive civilizations." But Zarthek had spent 10 days analyzing human history, and he understood something that the captain did not. "Captain, humans have learned how to make cooperation stronger than aggression. When faced with aggressive forces, they do not respond with individual resistance. They respond with collective resistance that is far more powerful than any individual aggression. You are recommending that we integrate a species into galactic civilization based on their weakness?" "No, Captain. I am recommending that we integrate them based on their strength. Humans have discovered a form of power that we have never seen before: the power to make others stronger rather than weaker. Every species they encounter becomes more capable through contact with humans, not less capable." As Zarthek transmitted his final report to the Galactic Council, he reflected on the 10 days that had changed his understanding of civilization itself. For centuries, galactic society had been built on the principle that power was a finite resource. One species' gain required another species' loss. Peace and stability were maintained through careful balance of threats and incentives. But humans had demonstrated that power could be generative rather than extractive. Their strength came not from taking from others, but from giving to others in ways that made everyone stronger. 3 months later, Zarthek received notification that the Galactic Council had approved his recommendation for human integration with a special classification unprecedented in galactic history. Humans would not be integrated as a client species or junior member civilization. They would be integrated as equal partners with full voting rights and immediate access to galactic technologies. But, more importantly, the Council had asked humans to establish what they called cooperation centers throughout galactic civilization. Other species would have the opportunity to learn human approaches to conflict resolution, resource sharing, and collective problem solving. The humans had accepted the invitation with typical enthusiasm, immediately beginning to organize volunteer teams to travel throughout the galaxy to help wherever they might be needed. As Zarthek prepared for his next assignment, he realized that his encounter with humanity had changed more than just his understanding of one species. It had changed his understanding of what civilization itself could become. For the first time in galactic history, a species had been invited to join not because they were strong enough to demand membership, but because they were wise enough to deserve it. And as human ships began to spread throughout the galaxy carrying teachers, healers, engineers, and scientists eager to help wherever they might be needed, Zarthek realized that the galaxy itself was about to learn what real power looked like. The power to lift others up instead of holding them down. The power to create abundance instead of managing scarcity. The power to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. It was the most dangerous power in the universe because it was the only power that made everyone stronger, including potential enemies. And it was the most beautiful power in the universe because it was the only power that created more of itself through use. Humanity had not just joined galactic civilization. They were about to transform it into something the universe had never seen before, a true community of worlds working together toward futures that would benefit everyone. And Zarthek had been privileged to witness the moment when everything changed.